This is the DRF Players Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the September 16th edition of the DRF Players Podcast. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatale, back with you, not from the little house near the East Side Rec, not from the Brooklyn bunker, but from an undisclosed location deep within the bowels of Woodbine Racetrack. Just got
Sounds like you're taking a bath, though, Pete.
That's not me. That's Kinchen. Usually he mutes and takes 6 seconds to answer questions. We're finding out why. But joining me, as always, are the usual crew we have from the DRF offices in New York, where I understand we might also have some background noise today. Mike Hogan.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm camped in. Fortunately, Jake Luft is working from home today. The conference room I usually camp in is under construction, and it's a roll of the dice. So,
and coming to us from a bathhouse, apparently, in Texas, Jonathon Kinchen. What's up, man?
I was trying. Look, I'm trying to make some bacon this morning, and I put bacon on both of my hands were dirty. My phone was locked. I couldn't mute it because I couldn't put the dirty bacon hands on the iPhone thumbprint thing. I had some leftover water in my sink, so I was trying to rinse off the bacon gook from my hands, and that's why it sounded like a bath. Sorry, my bad.
That's fantastic. Always very professional here at the DRF Players Podcast. Speaking of professional, funny enough, must be two offices down. Steve Bick and I are actually overhearing each other while we broadcast. I realize I'm maybe booming my voice a little less than I usually do, and I'm realizing it's a little bit of self-consciousness. I don't want to distract poor Mr. Bick when he's down there. I'm going to get the chance to go on with him later. It's been great listening to him broadcast from up here yesterday and today as well. But, all kinds of craziness going on. If you're interested in more Woodbine content, I'll get this program note out of the way right away. We've got a webinar coming up. By the time you're listening to this, it's probably already completed, and you can find it drf.com/YouTube. But Mike and I will be joined a little bit later today by Steve Davidowitz to talk about some of these races on Saturday's card. We've got Ron Gierkink of the DRF coming in just a few minutes to talk about these stakes races. But I did want to take a couple minutes at the beginning of the show. Folks have really stepped up to the plate and answered the call for sending in different questions to us. Mike, I realized I was getting some electronic interference, so I took my phone and slid it across the room, and I realized that's where I have the questions. Do you remember off the top of your head some of the topics we wanted to talk about, or should I just get up and risk the interference and pick up the phone?
Well, we had a couple questions. One was emailed by Chad Sabo, I believe is his name, and that was a question about value. Whether, if you like a horse or you don't like a horse and the odds go from 3-1 to 10-1, at what point do you throw on your ticket? Is kind of the general question he's asking. So that was one. And then the other one was from, and I'd have to pull it up.
Let's do one at a time.
Yeah.
That's a good question. Now, also, I don't know how experienced of a player Chad is, so I don't know what he really means when he says the odds go from 3-1 to 10-1. If that's talking about a market move where you see a horse open up maybe at 3-1 and go to 10-1, or if a lot of people, beginning players, think that the morning line is a price that was ever actually on offer somewhere. So he might be saying if the morning line is 3-1 and a horse is 10-1, how does that change the way you look at it? And to me, depending on which way he's asking, the answer is very different. And the reason I say that, the morning line, it's just a guess. It's if you were confident that a horse was meant to be 3-1, if a horse is supposed to be bet and is 10-1, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because on one hand, usually horses who are quote unquote supposed to be bet, a lot of times when they're not bet for a reason. And I will occasionally factor that into my handicapping. But at the same time, when the discrepancy is that big, it could be a case where you're actually just getting a little bit of value on a horse who's become unfashionable, especially if a horse becomes unfashionable in the betting because one or two other horses in the race are being overbet. That to me is a good thing. So it's a little unfortunate. I can't just definitively answer that question because it depends a lot on the specifics and it can kind of cut either way. But I think he was asking Mike specifically because of that trifecta you gave out on last Friday's show. What was the horse there? What was the situation there vis-a-vis the question, and how would you answer it?
Well, in that case, it was Lots of Lex who won the race. I don't have the payouts in front of me, but I think she was a pretty good price. And I think, as I mentioned on the podcast on Tuesday, I wasn't following the betting, and I was just out having dinner with friends. Didn't even remember to bet the race myself. So it's possible that she maybe had opened up at 3-1 or a relatively short price, and then throughout the wagering drifted up to 10-1, which is probably around where she won.
That to me is a very positive sign. I mean, to me,
yes.
I love to see a horse take money early and drift, And again, none of these things are rules. It's not like, anytime that betting pattern happens, I like it. You also see that phenomenon sometimes, again, more with a shorter horse, of what's called backflashing, which I actually think is a negative sign. Again, that's a horse that should be bet, has been bet, and then late in the betting you see it keep popping up. That's a negative betting pattern to me. But to me, I can't think of too many more positive betting patterns than a horse, especially perhaps a maiden, that opens up short, drifts up during the betting, and then maybe comes back in again a little bit late. To me, that's like a classic wise guy betting pattern. Believe me, I don't get too hung up on this stuff. It's just stuff you can't help but notice when you're around the racetrack. I think it's always going to take a back seat to the fundamentals of handicapping. But Jonathon, let me ask you, do you pay attention to these kind of betting patterns? Is it something that factors into your handicapping even one bit?
I mean, a little bit. Like we've talked about on the show, even actually pretty recently, I think we talked about it. The public is the best handicapper around, and they probably have the best strike rate of anybody. And they're hitting it 33% of the time, right? I mean, so to me, the board doesn't lie. If you see a horse that you think is going to be, you convince yourself on the morning line, ooh, I'm going to get 3-1 on this horse, I can't wait to bet him. There's a lot of reasons why you feel excited about that, and you're willing to take 3-1 on the horse, and the horse opens up at 11-1. Like you missed something. You just did. You missed something. Look again. There's something about that sitting that's just not right. And so I would definitely think that it's a negative, and it would be enough in a certain scenario to talk me off of a horse.
I got another question in. This one is about tournaments from Brad, who's a listener to the podcast. Hello, Brad. He's a relatively new handicapper, weekend warrior type, and he had a question about bet construction and how bet construction may vary in a contest versus in your everyday play at the track. And the first thing that comes to mind for me is I make an assumption here that Brad's talking about live bankroll, because, of course, one of the things some people love about mythical money contests is how it takes bet construction out of the equation. What could be simpler than somebody gives you on DRF tournaments 12 races, and you just have to pick one horse in each race? Some people love that. The crowd that says, I'm a good handicapper, but I'm a terrible bettor, that mythical online format is perfect for them. But I'm pretty sure he's asking about live bank and how you might change what you're doing. I have some thoughts about it, but Jonathon, I think clearly this is one that needs to be answered by you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that to a certain extent, I started where it was a different type of betting. Live bankroll tournaments turned me into a much better trifecta player and turned me into a guy that never played the exacta to almost, it feels like this summer I exclusively played the exacta when I was playing a race. I didn't really play the tri that much. It was kind of like my summer project that I tried to perfect was playing the exacta a little bit. And so, and the reason being is because I think that we got to a point where I started to realize that third place in the trifecta can actually kill your value more than it can help your value. If you're betting $200 worth into the trifecta pool and the 5-2 shot runs third, you are better off having the exacta with that $200 spent differently than having the trifecta with the 5-2 shot in third. I mean, that's probably a whole other podcast discussion. But anyways, I try to treat it the same way. And I think that obviously there's certain scenarios, maybe in late game action or in-game action in the last race or the second to last race or something like that might change the way that you do things. But no, I treat it the same way. I bet aggressively, and I bet for my opinion to be right and not for things that I hope that are going to happen.
Here's my thought, and Jonathon, this is specifically based on watching you play in the Saratoga contest this year. I felt like a lot of the types of bets you made in there, you were heavily using Dutching techniques I think you wound up going all in 4 or 5 times during the course of that contest. And you made a lot of bets that made sense, isolating where the value was. But I feel like in a contest where the rewards are so outsized for finishing first as opposed to finishing fifth, like you ended up doing in that Saratoga contest, I feel like you might be better off setting aside a larger percentage of your play in a contest environment to try to just kill the race, because you get such an outsized value for absolutely killing the race. In other words, where in your average play you might spend, I don't know, just a tiny percentage, 5% of your play on just the horses you like absolute best in that exacta. Maybe that number in live bankroll should be closer to 20%, so that when you're right, as you like to say, you crush their souls. Thoughts?
No, I mean, 100%. I mean, the thing about it is that the rules of the tournament can somehow affect how you're going to play, because here's the deal: is if that tournament was a $600 live bankroll tournament, and the truth of the matter is, if I was playing in a live bankroll tournament with a $600 bankroll and they would let me do whatever I wanted to do, then I would bet $600 in the early pick 5 and see what happens, or I would bet $600 in the late pick 4. Like, that's what I would do. So in that scenario, I was not allowed to do that. So what I did essentially was I kind of exacted Dutch to my way into a similar scenario where all I had to do was pick the winner of 4 races and to pick. That's what I did. So I just kept going all in. It just happened to be that my bankroll turned from 600 to 1200, 1200 to 2400, but that's essentially what happens in a pick 4 and a pick 5 anyways, right? You hit the first leg and you invested $600. Your bankroll then turns into 1200. It's just 1200 you can't touch. It's 1200 that's hidden in equity of the bet.
It's a parlay, yeah.
Absolutely.
Hopefully that's helpful there, Brad. Mike, you had said you had one more question. I wasn't able to locate the other one, but let's do that, and then let's bring in Ron and let's talk about these races from Woodbine. But let's deal with this other question first.
Yeah, for sure. It's from Michael Vendito. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And he said he appreciated the talk on pace and speed from the podcast on Tuesday. And he said, I always horses who have clocked the fastest 2 fractions in the PPs. If they have that and the fastest final time at that distance, I always bet it. Am I missing with that approach? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So for me, and I saw his tweet, and I figured we would talk about it here. That at its core is not a bad idea, right? The problem being is that when you're somewhere like the Breeders' Cup, that doesn't work, because a horse from Santa Anita is always going to have the fastest fractions. He's always going to have. It's just compared to a horse that was running at Saratoga or Delaware or some place with a crazy run up. The way that I would translate what he's trying to do to be more effective and to be more, to work at different tracks and different scenarios is I would use Moss pace figures, because they're supposed to be able to compare from track to track. I would use the Moss pace figures, and I would use the Beyer figure instead of using the raw times that are given in the form.
And of course, for turf racing, we don't have Moss, but you could either look in that situation for other commercially available fake pace figures for turf races, or you could make your own figures. If you check out work by great handicapping authors like Jim Quinn, there's some relatively simple formulas. Now, it'll take you time to crunch a card doing that. And if you're looking at horses that are on the same circuit, I agree with Jonathon 100%. Those raw times can still be misleading, but they're probably going to be a little bit better. But I think a figure-based approach, and at least like learning the process of how to make your own late pace figures is something that I think would be useful for a lot of people. Jim Quinn's work, probably the place to go for that. Trying to remember the specific book where he goes into that. I think it's in more than one of his books. Maybe I'll send, if you're curious about this, hit me up on Twitter, and I'll dig into my library when I get back to Brooklyn and find the specific chapter for folks who want to do that. But yeah, Jonathon hit this one out of the park with his answer. Mm-hmm. It should be more based on figures than on raw times, as far as I'm concerned. Mike, anything to add on that?
No, I think Jonathon covered it. I think the run-up is huge. I mean, take a look at the run-up for some races. At Keeneland, it's 5 feet. Other races at Gulfstream Park, it might be 100 and some odd feet. So horses that get a running start are obviously going to have faster early figures or early fractions than ones that basically start from standing still.
All right, now I want to welcome to the show a guest that I've been meaning to have on for a long time, that we've been meaning to have on for a long time, but we finally got him here. Ron Gierkink, what's your official title, Ron? Which correspondent are you officially?
Handicapper, writer for Woodbine. I do both of that. I've done that for a while.
I wasn't sure if technically you were like the correspondent for all of Canada, or if Woodbine was actually in the job title. But it's a big fan of your work, very respected handicapper up in these parts, and it's great to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Pete.
All right, well, what we're going to do, we've got about 45 minutes left on the show today. Jonathon has to cut out a little bit early. So what I want to do is we're just going to dive in to some of the specifics of handicapping, mainly the stakes races on tomorrow's Woodbine card. Normally we do the public handicapper races. With being up here in Woodbine and all the attention and having Ron as a guest, we're going to deviate from our normal formula this week, and we're gonna focus on Woodbine. And then at the end of the show, Ron, I want to bring it back and talk a little more about you. Whenever we have a guest on the show for the first time, we always like to get a little bit about their background, etc. We'll do that, and we'll talk about Woodbine a little bit more generally. But let's start with the specifics. Let's get down to the nitty-gritty. We've got 4 stakes races on Saturday. The first of them is the Ontario Derby. It's a Grade 3, going 1 1/8 miles on the Tapeta. Ron, as the guest, we'll start with you. What are your thoughts on this race?
Well, it's an interesting mix of horses. We have Amise Gizmo coming out of the Canadian Triple Crown. He ran second in the Queen's Plate after winning the Plate Trial, and then he went to the dirt at Fort Erie and won the Prince of Wales there pretty easily. He's coming off a bad race, going 1.5 miles on turf in the Breeder Stakes. I think we can throw that one out. I mean, I think going 1 mile on the Tapeta is maybe his best trip. But now we're introducing some horses, a horse like the Stronach Stables Berliner, a really hot turf horse right now, who's won 3 in a row. Now he's never run on the Tapeta before. He's worked well on it. He's a bit of a wild card in the race. And we've got another horse like Dragon Bay who keeps getting disqualified. He went to Saratoga, got disqualified out of the stake there from 3rd to 5th, and he's a troublemaker, this horse. He was second.
A bad boy, the Dennis Rodman of the field.
He's he's an underneath horse in the exotics for sure. And the horse I picked in the paper was 0 Hour. He's been working very well for Mark Casse since he broke his maiden here. He's only run twice, and he won his maiden easily. I'm guessing he's an up-and-comer in this division. He's a son of Bernardini, so he should like stretching out from 7 furlongs. That's my pick. He should be a good price. I mean, he recently outworked an older horse called Patriotic and Proud. He beat him easily in a workout. I think he's okay. A few shippers like the Tail of the Nile from Presque Isle doesn't look all that good, and then Yo Carm coming from Arlington, coming off a win in a mile stake there on the Poly track. Yeah, I don't know what to make of him. He's got a Rat Ortiz riding, and Chris Block. When he doesn't ship here very often, but he does. You have to sit up and take notice. He's had success here in the past. So.
Jonathon, I know you love that angle that Ron mentioned on 0 Hour, going through the work tab. In Ron's case, probably actually having watched that workout and noticing the relative class of workmates and using that to put your eyes on a horse who you think might move forward. Does that argument sway you here, JK, or are you going in a different direction?
No, I mean, he's definitely a horse that they're using. The one that I kind of fell in love with was the outside horse, the 8 Gierkink. Rad's probably really excited to get away from his brother for a couple of days and start winning again. But, this horse ran on the Poly first time. Last time he'd always been kind of training on the Poly for Chris Block, that he's being down at Arlington Park. But I just thought the figure last time was pretty good. First time Poly feels like a horse that kind of grinded by in that last race and probably wants a little bit longer. So the extra 8th shouldn't be a problem for him. Drawn outside, and people that watch a lot of Woodbine races know that sometimes that's where that move is made, the winning move. And so for me at this price, I'm going to take this one. Amy's Gizmo is the type of horse that down here south of the northern border, we would kind of be one of those Triple Crown horses that just continues to take money just because of their Triple Crown performances and might not always deserve it. And so hopefully that one will take some money, and I'm going to lean on the 8 Gierkink.
Mike
Yeah,
Hogan.
and it's interesting.
Oh, you go ahead.
Arlington and shippers have done well here over the years, going from one synthetic track to another, and sometimes at a good price. So I think that's an excellent, I think that's a viable horse who could be an overlay. And you got Irad Ortiz.
Terrific jockey, great sense of pace, very good from coming from off of it, especially in a race where you think there's going to be speed. That's my question to you two guys. And Ron, I'll ask you first. I did think Gierkink had at least a decent setup last time. Do we think the pace is going to be enough here to bring that late grindy kick into play?
Yeah, that doesn't look like there's a whole lot of pace in the race, does it? I guess 0 hour will be close on the stretch out, but not a whole lot of speed in the race, I think.
Does that concern you at all, Jonathan?
No, I mean, some pace projections, the kind of quick little pace projection that I put together, I kind of had him on or near it anyways.
Okay.
That if it's a little bit light on pace, I don't think he's going to be compromised by that at all. I mean, at a shorter distance, he was a little bit further back, but you would think going a little bit longer, he's going to project to be a little bit closer.
Mike Hogan, where do you stand in this race?
I'm with Ron on 0 hour. He just looks like a horse that's on the improve, lightly raced, still could be any kind. That return race where he broke his maiden last out was fantastic and wasn't really even asked all that much. Ron mentioned he's by Burner. He's a half to a nice horse named India who won a few stakes races. I think he could be any kind, and Mark Casse knows what he's doing with these horses at Woodbine. I mean, it's a real vote of confidence to try him in the Ontario Derby in just his third start. So I'll be interested to see how much money he takes, but I think he'll be a big player in here.
All right, let's skip ahead now to the 8th race at Woodbine. I'll have a question for Ron later in the show about the sequencing of the stakes and the thinking behind it there, but we'll put a pin in that until we get Jonathan done on time. This is the Grade 2 Canadian, a mile and an eighth on the turf. Mike Hogan, let's start with you this time.
Oh boy, I'm looking at.
I already know. We already know.
No, I don't know. I mean, that's the thing. Like when you like a horse at 28-1 and they run a winning race, how can you take them at 3-1? Or how not take them at 3-1? I just don't even really know what to do here. I mean, obviously Reina and Desita are both big players in this race. The one that's kind of interesting to me, and I think is probably better than the race she ran last out, is Faufier. Is that how you say it?
I say Faufier. I've heard different callers call her different things. I go with Faufier.
Either way, my French is not very good. So I think she's a big player. I tweeted out last night that the Beverly D has proven to be a very live race. 3 out of 6 next out winners that have run since, a couple others that hit the board. I wouldn't be surprised if she's more forwardly placed than she was last out. There's not a whole lot of speed in here. I think she'll get a good stocking trip and might be a nice price.
So that Mike flipping the script there a little bit, JK. You were so sure he was going to pick his old friend, number 5, Reina de Bateria. Where are you going? Are you going with Reina, or do you have something else in here?
No. This is one of my favorite types of spots where, like, there's 3 off-the-pace horses that all kind of figure, and they're all going to be worried about each other. They're all going to go off at a similar price. Just give me the 12-1 shot that's going to be loose on the lead that no one cares about, and that's, I get Flava Flav. This is the perfect type of tournament horse for me because of Decida, I'll let you pronounce that one, Pete, or Reina de Bateria. If either one of them win in a tournament setting, it doesn't really hurt you that bad. But if the 6 win, you win the whole thing. So that's for me. I'll be on the 6, and I'll be front and back wheeling that horse and tries and exactly.
Ron, I'm going to take a shot at the pronunciation. I assume you could do this one better than me. Steep Amok, the 3 that Jonathon was referring to. What do we know about this shipper showing up in here, other than the fact that on form she certainly projects to be one of the ones?
Yeah, she's been a win-shy type in France. That concerns me, and you should probably be played accordingly that way. No Lasix, I don't like that, and she's a bit of a guess, but I prefer others in the race. I think I picked her 4th or something like that, but she's a bit of a guess. I kind of prefer I picked Decida in the paper, the so-called obvious horse coming off the grade 1. But I do like the local horse, Strut the Course, who won this race last year. She's coming off a bit of a layoff. She's worked well, and she's switching jockeys to Rafael Hernandez, who's really just taken Woodbine by storm this summer. He's riding here full time now. He's already 7th in the standings, and he won 2 races for Barb Minchell last Sunday. He seems to move horses up a lot too. So I think Strut the Course is going to run a big race. She's there. Whether she's good enough to beat some of these, the Chad Brown horses is in question. Because this race is a win and you're in now, all of a sudden we get really good horses for this race. And it should be noted too that there's rain in the forecast. It looks like we're looking at maybe good to yielding ground tomorrow if we do get the rain, and I think maybe that's something to consider too. If you're spreading out a bit in this race, I think you definitely have to use Midnight Miley. She's turned into the top older mare here on the main track. She's really a big, imposing filly. She was sent here by Little Red Feather because she's a synthetic horse. And interesting that she's lost Rafael Hernandez to Strut the Course, but I guess Flavian Pratt's pretty good pickup for this mare. When she did win on turf last year, it was a national claimer at Golden Gate. She's probably at her best on the main track here. So, but she should be loose on the lead, and the 1 1/8 distance, it's actually going to be probably 66 feet shorter than a 1 1/8 being run in lane 1. Lane 1's not the best lane here for speed. You prefer speed in lane 4 or 5, but that's not to say that if this horse handles some give in the ground, she could be tough to catch.
For folks that aren't that familiar with Woodbine, Ron, explain what you mean about those lanes. I assume they relate to the rail position on the gargantuan turf course on the outside?
Yeah, there's 5 lanes, and on big days like tomorrow, lane 1 will be used. That's the entire course. But the course isn't long enough to have a 1 1/8 race in lane 1 and 2, so they have to shorten it, and it's an about distance, and it kind of screws up the times too. Like we've had problems with the track's timing on the turf this year. It's just not accurate, and a lot of backup times are used on the turf course, a hand time backup time, and so if you see some fractions, I expect there won't be fractions posted for this race. Actually, that is what they usually don't. When we're in lane 1 at an about distance, probably no fractions posted, and they'll be posted on the chart after, obviously. So
something to pay attention to for sure. Now, Jonathon, hearing that about the forecast and looking at Midnight Miley's PP and seeing that yielding turf effort and how out of line it is with the rest of her work, does that give you any pause, or is this a case where the value is going to be such and you're such a pace handicapper that you're just going to hope for whatever reason she glides over the off-going, should that be the way the track comes up on Saturday?
She feels like a different horse now. right? I mean, like, I get it. That happened. They put her back on the poly. She won 2. Then she had a break. She just feels like a different horse now. She in the last 2 races, she won a grade 3 up at Woodbine. She won 2 grade 3s. She just feels different. And like I said, I mean, that soft grass can affect other horses as well. You know, the idea that she's going to be loose on what could be a tiring surface is even more reason to like her.
All right, Jonathan, we're going to keep it with you. Oh, Ron, you had another thought on that?
It's actually Mike. I had 2 quick things I wanted to say about the forecast. If it does come up yielding or good, note Decita. She is not a horse Chad Brown wants to run on a wet course. She ran in the Breeders' Cup Affiliate Mare Turf last year on a good track. It was her only non-effort on the PPs. She actually was scratched from a race prior to the Breeders' Cup as a prep because it came up too wet. I would completely down her if it comes up wet tomorrow. The other thing I wanted to note is Reina de Bateria was privately sold after the Diana to Lale Stables. I don't know what that means, but something worth noting.
Ron, what do you think? Do you think Chad might scratch Decita if it does come up soft? Have you heard any rumors about that?
I haven't, no. It's a very good point with her. I think it would have to rain a lot to maybe force someone to scratch out of a race like this. That's just my guess. Being a win and you're in, I mean, you know, if you win, you get a free trip to the Breeders' Cup, right? I think it's worth taking a shot. And this course is pretty, it takes a lot of rain for this to make this course really soft. But that being said, what Mike said, she could be a vulnerable favorite if it's a little giving, and it's worth taking a look at. Reina de Bateria, it's interesting that she's a bit of a wind shy type. Just wondering how she would handle a little give in the ground. I see she ran well in the Mrs. Revere at Churchill on good ground before.
At a huge price, yeah.
So, and she's got Peru back, so he almost won on her last time. That's interesting.
Yeah, a lot of interesting factors there, and as always with turf racing, a little bit easier to make final selections when we know what we're dealing with in terms of conditions, but a good job from the team to give out some thoughts there. Let's move it along to Woodbine's 10th. It's the Grade 1 Northern Dancer. Jonathan, we're going to let you start this time. What did you come up with here?
Yeah, how often do you hear this? I'm going to take Mark Cassie shipping into Woodbine.
This doesn't happen very often. This is kind of reminds me of a horse that, not the red board, that I picked, like maybe it was earlier this year, Grand Tito. I think when you find horses that have talent that are trying to run a 1.5 miles for the first time, you can find some value. I mean, obviously the horse was on the morning line because of the Grade 1 win earlier this summer, but if the horse can drift up a little bit, maybe the Chad, Wake Forest, Big Blue Kitten, who I'll never bet again without a rabbit, the Pizza Man, who I think has probably seen his better days. You know, if World Approval will drift just a little bit or stay at 2-1, I think that's kind of tremendous value on a horse that's so classy, trying to go a little bit longer for the first time. He'll be forwardly placed. Traffic shouldn't be an issue. I think Julian, surprisingly enough, is as much criticism as he can get. I think he's one of the best riders on the front end when he goes to the front, and so this horse might end up on the front. And if he does, I think he's going to be really, really tough.
I was going to ask that, Jonathan, if you thought he might have a pace advantage as well. Mike Hogan, what do you think of World Approval and the Northern Dancer in general?
Well, I think World Approval is a legit player here, partly because of exactly what Jonathan mentioned. He seems to be the lone speed in here, and he's a classy horse who's proven he can run big races in Grade 1s, including winning. Maybe not the greatest Grade 1 in the United Nations, but still he beat an okay field that included Money Multiplier and Wake Forest, who he's facing again tomorrow. I like him a lot better than Wake Forest, that's for sure. At a short price, I don't know if I'd lean on him too heavily, though. And I'm going to disagree with Jonathan a little bit here. I think Big Blue Kitten and the Pizza Man are upgrades, partly because Big Blue Kitten is finally getting back doing what I think he's better at, which is going much longer. The last 2 races are a little short for him. Even the 1.25 miles was maybe not his ideal distance. I think he wants a 1.5 miles. I don't know if I can say that for most of these horses in here. And the Pizza Man, I thought, ran quite a good race last out, coming from way off the pace. Didn't lose by all that much. He's going to be a good price, and he gets your buddy Jonathan Flavian Pratt. So I wouldn't be surprised to see well here either.
If pressed, Mike, to put an on-top selection, who would you go with of those?
The Pizza Man, mostly because of price, and at 8 now, I'm not sure Big Blue Kitten is the same horse he was last year, and at a shorter price, I don't want to bank on it, but I think Pizza Man's going to be a better price.
Big Blue Kitten. What Big Blue Kitten does well is win races where he gets set up by his buddy Shining Copper. And no Shining Copper, no Big Blue Kitten.
Oh, he was winning races well before he ever Shining Copper, though.
I want this debate to continue. What are you're gonna let Mike win, Jonathan?
No. I mean, just everyone grab your PPs and look down, and you'll see that Big Blue Kitten's last 2 wins, his buddy was in the race, and the races that his buddy wasn't in, he wasn't winning. He has no shot of winning this race. No shot.
Oh, I like it.
Oh, come on. There's no Divisadero in here. There's no Found and Golden Horn in here. I mean, he's getting back to the 1.5 miles. He likes this distance. How many of these other horses do?
There's no Twilight Eclipse in here.
That's a low blow. Ron, we're going to need you to settle this debate. Where do you stand on Big Blue Kitten, and who did you end up picking in the Northern Dancer?
I did watch him finish second in the Canadian International a couple of years ago. He almost won the race. I mean, I don't know what to do with him. I guess you could say he's going to be overbet. Maybe that's reason enough to dismiss him unless you're spreading out a bit in the exotics. I would assume he's got him cranked up if he's had the summer off and everything. I prefer Danish Dynaformer. He loves 1.5 miles on this course. He won the Breeders' Stakes as a 3-year-old, and he won the Grade 3 Singspiel 2 back. When I talked to Patrick Husbands the other day, who rode him in the Arlington Million, he said when the horse bobbled at the start, it wasn't a bad bobble, he said, but it put him way farther back than he wanted to be. And he was 8th, 9th, and then he put in a pretty decent little run after saving ground and was 5th, beating 1.5 lengths. I think he would have been even closer if he'd had been more forwardly placed in the Arlington Million. I'm going sort of with the horse for course angle here and Roger Atfield, and I think he's got a big shot.
Is Woodbine's turf, Ron, in your estimation, a course that certain horses typically do well on? I would assume that it is, given its unique galloping nature for what I'd call galloping nature for a North American course, given the way the stretch works, the way the turns work. It seems to me like the kind of course that should lend itself to certain horses. Would you say that's generally correct?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and yet again, Mark Cassidy once told me, he said, I find that a lot of my horses handle this course, even if they don't have a lot of turf breeding. I guess just because there's not tight bends and it's more wide open and but then again, I think there is a certain school of thought that it's a good horse for course type of course.
Well, Danish Dynaformer certainly fits that bill with the 2 wins up here, including a Beyer speed figure of 97, just 1 point off the career best of 98. Certainly would be one on my short list as well. But the main event on Saturday it will go as the 12th race. It is the Woodbine Mile, of course, and we see the return to the races of the so-called Queen of the Turf, the Great Tepin. Ron, we're going to start with you again on this one. If you were playing multi-race exotics that included the Woodbine Mile, what percentage of your play would utilize Tepin?
Well, I'm thinking about keying Mutakayev in my pick 4 on this in this sequence. I think he's almost as good a horse as Tepin, and he's obviously going to be much better value. He's really improved a lot since they gelded him last winter, and he was maybe arguably best in his last race when he got in trouble running third to Postponed, who's a very good, among the top turf horses in the world, really. He doesn't mind in the ground, and I think he's the value of the race. I mean, there's obviously no value with Tepin, and a lot of people will be keying her on their tickets, and justifiably so, I guess. But if I could get the pick 4 with getting Mutakayev, it's probably going to pay huge.
I like it. Very bold, singling against the odds-on favorite. That sounds like a Jonathon Kinchen move to me. Actually, the Jonathon Kinchen move is just betting it all on the favorite. Let's be honest. But where do you stand on your old pal Tepin here?
I might fly into town and bet it all on her. I'm just kidding. I don't know. I mean, this feels like the spot you want to bet against her. It feels like there was 2 spots she was supposed to run in before this. I think it was pretty much well publicized that she was a little bit tired and knocked out from what was probably one of the best performances we've seen from a 4-legged animal all year. So it's like I'm not mad at her about it, and it's not like I want to knock her. I feel like this is the spot you're supposed to bet against her, but I just don't think these horses are good enough. I think she's going to be loose. I think it's a home game for the Cassies. They're going to be at their own barn. They're going to know which way to turn and which way not to turn, and all the. It's just I just don't see how you can beat her. But if you have an idea, good luck to you.
Mike Hogan, where do you stand? Are you with her in this race?
I'm with Ron and with Full Mast. I would play against Tepin and hope to create values in the multis using a couple horses that were really, really good overseas. And look, Tepin, she could win. She probably will win, but at the short price with the question marks there, Jonathon mentioned there were a couple spots that they were thinking about. They weren't in love with some of her works, and then she started working fantastic. But, this isn't the real goal. The real goal is coming in a few months, and if she runs well but gets beat to second or third, no disgrace in that. And I think she's facing a tougher field than she's faced even at Ascot last out. As Ron mentioned, Mutakayev is no slouch at all. And look, Full Mast was running with Glen Eagles and was elevated via DQ. I mean, he's a legit horse overseas. He hasn't shown it quite yet over here, but I wouldn't be surprised if he does tomorrow.
That's an interesting pick. For me, I want to pick Mutakayev. I think that the form is there. I just worry that the specific circumstances of this race are going to make it very difficult for Tepin to get beat. So for me, I would probably try to hedge a little bit and do about 70% of the play through Tepin, and then just take the other 30% and put it on Mutakayev. I would have tried to make you a case for A-Rod. Connections, though, have been trying to avoid soft ground with him all year. Not going to be happy, I don't think, one bit if the ground comes up with a little bit of cut in it. The other thought I had, and maybe this is the way that Mutakayev could get up, if there's any kind of team tactics with A-Rod working harder on the front end to give Tepin a tougher time. I don't think Mr. Owen is good enough to be the beneficiary of that setup, the other Qatar racing runner, but maybe that's what would set it up for Mutakayev. Ron, what do you think of the pace scenario in this race?
Yeah, I think they want a rod. I mean, we all want to say A-Rod, I guess. They call him a rod. Yeah,
absolutely right.
We want him on the lead. I talked to the assistant at the draw yesterday, and he did say, like you were mentioning, he wants the course like a road. So it doesn't look like he's going to get rock-hard turf. But I expect him on the lead with Tepin tracking. I think Tepin's going to get the trip that they want. She's going to get a great trip tracking them. Yeah. She's going to take over from a rod at a certain point, and we'll see if Mutakayev can come with a run. I mean, it's going to be, and I don't really like much else in the race. I don't think Mr. Owen has the turf came up yielding last year in a weaker field than this, and he was nowhere. So I guess the best local horse is Glenville Gardens, who's really in good form right now, won 3 in a row. Usually one of the locals, maybe they finish third or fourth, or every 5 or 6 years one of them wins, but it doesn't happen very often.
Ron, do you think he might muddy the pace here a little bit? I was wondering if on the stretch out Glenville Gardens might try.
It's possible, because Gary Boulanger likes to take advantage of paceless races by going to the lead if he thinks he can take advantage of that. But the horse has developed a really good stalking style. And I think sometimes you have a local horse in $1 million race like this, the trainer, they're thinking, I wouldn't mind getting a piece of this purse. I don't think we can beat a horse like Tepin, but third money is $100,000. I don't know if they want to sacrifice this horse just to try and get to the lead and and when it probably won't work out. So and I know the trainer pretty well, Siddharth, and I think he'd just be happy to get a piece of the purse. So I don't expect he'd lead, but you never know.
It seems like it's just going to be an unbelievable setup. As the race starts to run in my mind, it just seems like it's going to be such a great setup for Tepin. But, hey, at the price, I think Ron's approach and Mike's approach make a ton of sense as well. All right, Jonathon, I know you got a jet. We're going to let you drop off. We're going to hang on to you, Ron, and we're going to chat a little bit more generally about Woodbine. My personal feeling is that it's a track that a lot of American horse players should probably be paying more attention to. There's a lot of interesting things going on up here, and especially for a lot of USA players who love turf racing, I'd love to see them getting a little bit more involved. I was just interested to pick your brain a little bit about some of the eccentricities and some of the things that USA horse players should be paying attention to when they're focusing their attention on this racetrack here.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have a new Tapeta track this year. I've replaced the poly track from last year, and it's a bit of a quirky surface like a lot of synthetic tracks are. It seems to play pretty fair for the most part. Back in the spring, there was a problem with the track was kind of dry and loose, and they added some fiber to it, and it got better. And then the summer came along. It was kind of they started watering it recently between races when it got hot, and that because synthetic tracks, as you know, they need moisture and they need water to tighten it up. And we had a dry summer, so the track was getting dry and loose at times, and so without much rain, they were watering it between races, and that helped a bit and helped with the kickback. And the jury's still out whether it's the magical track that we need for Woodbine, and it certainly helps with a long season with different weather that to have a synthetic track. I mean, I don't know what else to say about the Tapeta. I'm kind of used to synthetic tracks after 10 years of poly track, so I don't know if I'd want to go back to a dirt track at this point. But looks like we're stuck with this track still, and it's kind of a good complement to the turf course, which some horses handle both.
It's got to be helpful to the local horse population in that sense. Let me ask you about the question I alluded to before about what, to my mind, is an unusual decision to stagger the stakes races throughout the card on Saturday. Do you know what went into that decision? And is it something you approve of, or do you find it curious like I do?
Maybe they're just looking to try and get big fields amongst the late pick four, right? The Woodbine Mile has an 8-horse field. The Northern Dancer has an 8. So they've added an Ontario sired maiden optional claimer has a 10-horse field in the 9th. And then the 11th has a 10-horse field. Maybe they're just trying to get big fields in both pick fours and spread it out that way. It's not they need time to change the rail or anything on the turf course. They don't. So it's always been the way they've done it here. They don't put 4 stakes races together for whatever reason.
Mike Hogan, as a horse player, what do you think of that? I mean, horse players say they like higher quality racing. They say they like big fields. For you personally, which would you rather see a racetrack prioritizing on a big day like this Saturday at Woodbine?
Look, I wish. I mean, the two races we're talking about that are out of the pick 4 sequence are a 7-horse Grade 2 with older fillies and mares, and then the Ontario Derby, which is an 8-horse field. I personally wish I could play an all-stakes pick 4. I understand the logic behind it, but just me personally, I wish I was playing an all-stakes pick 4. I was going to make a little bit of a joke, though. back when I used to play a little poker game with friends, we used to refer to a 2, 4, 8, 10 hand as a skip straight, and we'd say, "Oh, that pays in Canada." And I think that's kind of what you got going on here, right?
That is the alignment of the stakes races, indeed. I've never heard that. The skip straight. I like it.
Skip straight, yeah.
Ron, we can't let you get out of here without getting a little bit of your background, something we always like to ask of all of our new guests. How did you get into racing, and how did you end up with your position at the DRF?
I grew up on a horse farm, like a breeding farm in Ontario, and I worked with horses when I was young. I never rode them or anything. We bred horses and sold them as yearlings at the sale, and that's how I got involved. And then started going to the track when I was in my teens, and of course I read Andy Byer's books. That got me hooked on it, and it was great to meet Andy a few years ago when he did a seminar here. And I got to know when I started doing a little writing for Canadian Thoroughbred magazine. I went to the press box a lot at Woodbine and Greenwood, and I got to know my old editor Bill Talon, and he hired me when Bill became editor in 1988. He hired me as assistant editor, and we worked together for about 25 years. And so I've been with the forum since 1988, working up here.
That's an impressive run. Doing both jobs, you obviously get a very close look at the horseman side of things. If you're rooted in Andy Byer's books, you obviously have a classic handicapping background as well. How do you attempt to integrate the sort of fundamentals of handicapping along with the horseman side, the things you know from growing up and interacting with horsemen every day? I think some people lean very heavily towards one side or the other. It seems like you do both pretty well.
Yeah, I own some horses too. So sometimes you joke like it's better if you don't know anything about what goes on in the backstretch, or this horse had some vet work done going into the race or whatever. Sometimes you hear that and you're swayed and you might be better off just not knowing anything. I've started watching a lot of works in the last few years, and because I live close to the track, it's easy for me to go to the main track after the break at 8 o'clock, and I can watch gate works. I really like watching gate works because you're watching horses compete, 2 or sometimes 3 together, and it's like winning a race to me when I see a horse win a gate work, and that factors into my handicapping sometimes. But I'll pick a horse because a first time starter because they have been working well from the gate, or if I've seen them work well from the pull. But I sort of encompass a lot of stuff, like breeding is my background, so I like pedigree and good debut sires and precocious pedigrees, horses that are bred for the turf, and I factor that in with. I don't do my own speed figures anymore. I just use the Beyer figures, and I do trip notes. I sit down with every card after the card's over, and I do trip notes in the program, and that's a big thing to me too. The Tapeta and the Polytrack, they're not as biased as dirt tracks are. They still yield some biases, and they're worth noting and following horses and stuff like that. I still use a multitude of handicapping factors and put them all together when making decisions.
Folks interested in getting all that information, your trip notes, your observations in the morning, they can read your analysis in the Daily Racing Form. They can also follow you on Twitter. How can folks find you there?
The DRF Gierkink.
There you go. And also articles in the Form as well. There isn't one place to get. It's not like your trip notes and workout reports are published separately, but I have a feeling if you follow Ron's work closely, you're going to be able to get most of the salient points and the ones that are actionable in terms of your betting. I suppose that's the goal, right, Ron?
It factors into the handicapping, yes. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, speaking of handicapping, while we have you, I want to see if you had any other strong opinions on the card on Saturday, or maybe talk about just quickly if you have a sketch of the other horses you want to try to use in that late pick 4 paying off to Mudakayev. I'm sure folks would be interested obviously they can read your analysis, but to hear you talk through your thought process on some of the betting for Saturday.
Or that guaranteed pick 5, which starts in race 8, 20-cent minimum at Woodbine, which is kind of nice.
Yeah, it is. I don't like the 25% takeout, but that's
fair.
I play more pick 4s and pick 5s, but I'll definitely look at the pick 5s tomorrow. And I get the 11th race. I picked Zonka off the claim. He's adding blinkers off the Norm McKnight claim. That Norm McKnight's one of our super trainers. He's been hitting at 31% at the meet, and I expect this horse to maybe improve off the claim. I don't know how much deeper I'm going to go in that race at this point. There's a few others like Cito, and I just have to kind of put a ticket together and see how it comes out. Seeking the Bay looks okay, and I guess we'll go back to the first leg of that pick 4 is the 9th race, and I'm just wondering who I'm glad. Sorry?
Go ahead. I was just going to say I'm glad we're at the 9th so that we can mention the name Ratface McDougal.
That is quite a name.
I like the 2 Butler's pick. His first race was good. There was a horse, the winner of that race, Corky's the name, was much more experienced, a very fast horse in a 5-furlong race. He went right to the lead and never looked back, and that's how the race figured to go. And this horse debuting in that race was a pretty good second, kind of a distant second, but he's had a little break since that race, and maybe the 6.5, going from 5 to 6.5 will help him a bit. Ratface is a speed horse. I don't think he's going to maybe get the distance. There's a couple of sort of professional maidens in the race, like Sir Bronx, who I don't know what to do with him, if I'll be using him in case the race falls apart and he could pick up the pieces. And let's see. There's a few. I don't really like the first-time starters in the race. I'm familiar with a few of them. And I guess you got to look at Just Reno coming out of an open maiden special to this restricted maiden special. It's partially restricted, and he's coming off a distant third to Pink Lloyd, who got the money in his next start in an allowance race. So Pink Lloyd doubled up coming out of this race. So I think you got to consider that horse too.
Yeah, I love Just Reno in here. Yeah.
Who's your pick, Mike?
I love Just Reno for a lot of the reasons Ron said. Going back to last year, ran well in the 3 state-bred maiden races, then tried open, wasn't quite as good, showed a little bit of speed there. Then they laid him off until the summer, brought him back on the wrong surface, stretched him out against winners, and brought him against open. Now he's back in against state-breds and 40K claimers. I think he's going to be a big player in this race. I got a question for you about Butler's pick, though, Ron. Mm-hmm. Debuted well in the maiden special weight, and as an Ontario sired and bred horse, is eligible to run here without the tag. Yet they choose after that good debut and the little bit of a break that you mentioned to put him in for the tag. Do you see that as a negative at all?
It could be. Now, if you run him for the tag. Here he's eligible for the bonuses for running an open company, so he would get more purse money.
Okay.
He's eligible for more purse money. Now, of course, they're risking losing him, but it is right. 40,000, and he's, the horse has only run once. I guess he's had his issues along the way. If he were my horse, I would probably do the same. Probably run him for the 40, and you're eligible for more money.
That's a great observation, Ron, about the economics of it. I mean, here you have a horse by a less than $3,000 sire. Not like they want to lose the horse, but I mean, 40, just scratching the surface of it, would certainly seem to be a fair price and probably a risk you want to take in the big picture financial / economic future, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and you look at the base purse, it's $31,000, but he'll compete for another 12, and if you add in the Ontario bred bonus and the Ontario sired bonus, so that's quite a bit more money. And I can And it's interesting, like we're talking about just Reno, like he'll be coming from off the pace in this race. I expect Butler's pick to be on the lead with De Silva picking up the mount from an inside post. He's probably going to gun the horse to the lead. Ratface has got lead, so this race could set up for somebody if it falls apart. But I would expect Butler to be on the lead.
All right, yes. You mentioned Sir Bronx as a potential beneficiary before if things do heat up, and maybe one to think about in your backups if you are going to be playing that $250,000 guaranteed pick four with the 20-cent minimum on Saturday. We're just about out of time. Mike, do you have another speed round type question for Ron, or should we just get to a quick final thought and let everybody get about their days here?
No, I'm. I really enjoyed having you on, Ron. I hope we'll have you back again soon.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah. Canadian International will be a big in October. We could do the Canadian International card. Yeah.
We could have some fun with that. Maybe get Marcus Hirsch to join us as well. Talk about some of the shippers who will presumably be coming over for that race. That could be a very fun show. Let's keep that in mind. My final thought is just simply, if folks missed out, we had a really fun webinar yesterday with our buddy Pat Cummings talking all about Hong Kong racing. If you're interested in emerging markets in horse racing, Hong Kong is a place you got to be looking. Pat did a great walkthrough about some of the information available with Mike Hogan and myself. You can find that on YouTube DRF.com/YouTube. You can also find further discussion of Saturday's Woodbine races with Steve Davidowitz, which should be posted later today as well on there. Going to be a lot of fun. Always fun to catch up with Steve. So that's it. I want to thank Jonathon Kinchen. I want to thank Ron Gierkink. I want to thank Mike Hogan. I want to thank Mike Eves for finding this little office nook for me to hang out in today, and for all his hospitality and the hospitality of the great folks at Woodbine. Most of all, I want to thank all of you for listening. We will be back next week on Tuesday. If you're playing this weekend, may you win all your photos. 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 Photos.